Hey guys, this is Drew Donaldson, and you're watching the DDT Method podcast. Before we get rolling on this week's amazing episode, I want to take a quick moment and tell you about the DDT Method School Group. If you support our podcast and you want to continue to do so and help us grow, the DDT Method School Group is the best way to do that. It's only $10 per month, but there's at time of recording over 50 exclusive videos breaking down peptides with deep dives, going over courses, dosages, and different cycles of peptides, PEDs, supplements, as well as articles and information on training and nutritional approaches as well. This is where we can talk about absolutely anything unfiltered, and we're building an amazing community of like-minded individuals coming from the worlds of biohacking and longevity, bodybuilding, getting as big as humanly possible, getting as lean as humanly possible. There's just a ton of information and a ton of really cool discussion. And again, those over 50 exclusive videos on PEDs, peptides, protocols, you name it. It's all there in the DDT Method School Group. Now back to the show. Welcome back to the DDT Method podcast. This week, I'm here with Joe Jeffrey, and I am super excited for this podcast because all the work that Joe has done for over a decade in the industry, working with competitors, working with people that just want to better themselves, people that want to step up their longevity goals, their fitness goals, their aesthetic goals, whatever it might be. Joe has accumulated so much practical experience and is so educated in so many different facets of the field that we love, which is fitness and longevity and performance and this all-encompassing just obsession that most of us have. And today we're here with somebody that can speak on almost every angle of it. And I really think that although I have all the respect in the world for the experts that zero in on one particular facet of something that we do, like your biomechanics specialists, like your nervous system specialists, like your PED specialists, whatever people choose to focus in on, I love the conversations with the guys and girls that are absolute authorities in one specific area because they've dedicated so much time to that. But I have the most fun with the guys and girls that can speak on every angle of what we do, because to really do what we do to the highest level, it all comes down to synergy. It all comes down to checking all the boxes and doing all the right things. And I've been so impressed with everything that Joe's been putting out for a long time. And as I always do say when I tend to get excited about a guest, I have no reason to kiss his ass because he's already here. He already agreed to do the podcast. So this is just me giving you guys my thoughts, hyping you guys up a little bit because this is going to be an absolute banger. Joe, before we just dive into all aspects of just optimization and enhancement, give us a quick background for anybody watching this that might not be familiar with you and your company. What brought you to the table here? What brought you to be doing what you're doing? And what motivates you to keep going?
Drew, thank you so much for that big introduction. I feel like I've got something to live up to now. So yes, for anybody that doesn't know me, my name is Joe Jeffrey. I've been an online coach for, it's coming on 11 years full-time. I was doing a bit of this and that before then, but I wouldn't call myself a full-time coach. Back in the days of online forums, it was Dante Trudell, Scott Stevenson, Jason, who you've had on this podcast. Very few people, back in those days, simpler times. So I've been doing this for quite a while. I previously worked primarily with competitors, well, essentially entirely with competitors for the majority of my career, because that's what I loved to do. In the last couple of years, my client numbers have slowly titrated down. I created the Physique Collective app alongside my business partner, Matt. That kind of shifted the focus to what we were talking about a little bit before we recorded, with more of a focus on mass scale education. You know how it goes. I think everybody that's a successful coach has this innate desire to help as many people as they possibly can. And when you've been full clip coaching at maximum for a period of time, it's like you want that wider net of people to help, so, but the app's been really successful, and that's that continues to grow. We've got a beautiful, supportive community there, which is awesome to see. And my work has somewhat drifted more into consultancy-based stuff, more in-person consultancy as of recently, traveling a lot to do a lot of that. But my focuses, my specialization, as you could kind of call it, has changed a lot over the years. I was known as the PED guy for a while. Then I was the peaking guy or the prepping guy, and I don't really know what I am now. just kind of the guy that's trying to help. I would say over the last year, more than anything, I've found great joy in helping people with, you touched on the nervous system. I would say more nervous system, maybe brain related stuff, helping a lot of people with anxiety-based issues, stress-based issues. And I think that was born from not only from my own issues. I think all coaches are problem solvers. I think one of the beautiful things in our career is that we're generally people that when faced with a problem will go to any length to learn the intricacies and the nuances of the answer to that problem. And then somebody else will pay us to give them those same answers to that problem, But that's been very, very rewarding. But yeah, in essence, I'm a guy that likes to help other people with their physique, but also with their mindset, with their daily practices, you could say, as much as possible.
I think you made a great point there, and I definitely want to swing back a little bit and kind of call that out or single that out. And it's not a universal rule, but it's just a very interesting trend or correlation that I've seen, especially since launching this podcast, it's almost been a year now. It's been about 11 months, and I've gotten to speak to so many brilliant people. And what I've found is, and this isn't the main qualifying point, because I don't want anybody to feel like, oh, that's not me, so you're saying I'm not good, but a lot of the best and most well-rounded educators in our space, like as a whole, encompassing the bodybuilding side, the longevity side, the performance side, a lot of the best guys have basically been in a place where they're trying to solve these problems that they've had, be it anxiety issues, digestive disorders, just generally the inability to get big or get lean or whatnot. The guys and girls that have had the biggest mountains to climb usually are the ones that have accumulated like this giant, just vast base of knowledge, because we just relentlessly try to fix these problems in ourselves, learn about them, and then once we get rolling on that, once that snowball effect happens, we tend to do it with all other aspects and all other corners. So I always feel that that's a incredibly interesting correlation. Now, you've accumulated all this knowledge, and you said starting in the physique or more so in the bodybuilding world, and then kind of broadening that to general education and whatnot. I always see that as well being a trend with people that just get really good at solving problems tend to inevitably branch out into a greater population, which then gives them the ability to work with an even bigger selection of human beings. So I'll ask you this a bit generally, but we'll narrow in the scope a little bit to be a little bit more cohesive with our listener base here. So let's say that somebody is of a decently high level for a normal person. And I know that description's kind of all over the place, but let's say it's not a top 10 Olympian. It might not even be a nationally qualified competitor as far as bodybuilding goes, but somebody that either competes or doesn't matter. But they want to look like a freak. They want to look like a cartoon character. Not a Ronnie Coleman freak, not a Branch Warren freak, but just somebody that if they're at the gym in a tank top, male or female, people are like, holy shit. Like whatever the definition of holy shit can apply to, they want to look enhanced, next level, just holy crap, but they want to do everything. They want to still have good energy. They want to be productive at work. They want to have control over their lives. Just the general optimization crowd, but to the highest level that's reasonably possible. Whether or not they're competitors or everyday people, what is one problem? It doesn't have to be the top one, but what's something that you consider to be low-hanging fruit that can make an impactful difference and quickly that most people seem to be dropping the ball on?
See me smiling. I love this question because I've got such a clear answer. And I think this answer might differ from what some coaches that may be listening to this would think. And I think I'll sound a little bit like a cliche when I say this. And I think some people will expect me to say this. But let's preface this with the fact that everyone, for the most part, has access to the same drugs. Everyone, for the most part, believe it or not, guys, I've done consultations with so many high-level pros, so many Olympians, top 5 Olympians, classic and open, and they're not doing anything that you're not doing. I promise they're not doing anything that you're not doing. We're all doing the same stuff dietarily, training-wise. There is something that differs greatly that I started to draw a correlation on a few years ago, but it's been something that I've been really actively working on over the past year with clients that, as you mentioned, is such low-hanging fruit that everybody has access to, but it's never the thing that you think of. And I'm not exactly sure what umbrella term you could use. I don't think it really matters. Some people would call it stress management. Some people would call it nervous system regulation. Whatever you want to call it, your ability to drive hypertrophy adaptations is entirely dependent on your ability to mobilize into parasympathetic tone quickly, robustly, and to live under that tone for the widest area under the curve between your activities that are sympathetically driven in nature, your resistance training, your cardio, even to some degree your androgen use. We know that androgens have a sympathetic underlying tone to them in a dose-dependent response. Implementing practices that strategically force or shunt in parasympathetic tone, whether that be post-workout, whether that be at regular intervals through your day, will revolutionize your experience of physique development in general, but also your experience of life. And if anybody is interested, go on my Instagram page, and I've got a story highlight called Mindfulness. Go and look on there, and you'll see how many screenshots I've got from people that I've had better feedback on the return on investment of some of these things than I have from any PED, stack design, from any training programming in the last decade of coaching people. It's been the single most robust thing because it's something 95% of people aren't doing, whereas everybody else is doing all of the other things. And I think when you learn just how potent of an input the autonomic nervous system has on your adaptations, if anybody could know, they'd go, oof, I should really pay attention to this. Because if you're not predominantly parasympathetic, you're just not expressing muscle protein synthesis or mTOR to the magnitude that you could possibly be.
Hey guys, this is Drew from the past interrupting Drew from the future. It might actually be Drew from the future interrupting Drew from the past. I'm not 100% sure, but at the end of the day, yes, I'm putting a commercial in my own video, and I'm sure that YouTube has already hammered you guys with a bunch of random commercials for some pretty weird shit, but that's based on your algorithm. That's not my fault. This one is my fault though, but I just want to take a quick second and remind you guys about the DDT Method School Group. The DDT Method School Group is just $10 per month, but you can contribute to helping the podcast grow just by becoming a member. And when you're in, there's over 50 exclusive videos and articles, and I'm releasing more every week. That's 50 at the time of recording. If you're watching this later, there's probably well over 100, maybe even 200. There's a ton of content in there, regardless of when you jump in, and there's an amazing community of like-minded individuals as well. If you love the DDT Method podcast and you want to support us and continue to be able to watch us grow, this is the best way you can do it. The DDT Method School Group. Information down below somewhere. Again, I'm bad at this. Too many commercials. Back to the show. I'm so glad that this is where you went first, because I really do feel that this is the definition of the perfect answer for what I was looking for, because as you said, this is stuff that's accessible to literally everybody. These tools, these practices, depending on the degree to which you want to or need to go to, but it does move the needle so significantly. So to take a quick step back, for anybody that might not be well-versed enough to understand the foundation of what we're discussing here, we have, your nervous system being either parasympathetic or sympathetic. Sympathetic being fight or flight, go, go, go. Parasympathetic being rest and digest. And we're all at least familiar with those terms, I'm sure. But to optimize response to really any training, it's all about spending time, or the most time possible, in my opinion, being parasympathetic, except for the small bursts of time where you need to be sympathetic. But the big issue that I've found, that things like over-reliance on stimulants, guilty in some cases, things like having a busy schedule, a stressful life, as you mentioned, certain PEDs that we're not even taking for energy that might be driving us into that state. There are a lot of people out there that are sympathetically dominant for gigantic chunks of their lives. How much is this really holding people back? Like, what are some potential case studies or situations you've seen where you've been able to fix this for people and balance that out? And how far gone are the majority of us? Like, how bad is this situation with people being sympathetically dominant?
Yes. So this isn't entirely scientifically true, but it's true enough for the cases, for the sake of explanation. I encourage anybody to think of their autonomic nervous system like a bank, or maybe like a battery, where you are always making withdrawals, but you are also always paying back. And I'm sure any competitor here is very familiar with that accumulation of sympathetic dominance that occurs throughout a competition prep, where you have the added sympathetic drive of a caloric deficit and low body fat, the kind of dysregulation that happens to systems like cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, glutamate, etc., from being in that quote-unquote survival state. Layer on top of that androgens, which do drive sympathetic tone. It's very interesting, the neurochemistry of androgens. We don't have enough data to really have a sure thing. I've got some hypotheses. Clearly, there's a dopamine element. I also think that there's some kind of glutamate, GABA balance dysregulation that occurs there. How much of that is estrogen to progesterone ratio mediated, androgen estrogen ratio mediated? We don't know. But anyway, regardless, the behaviors of a competition prep bodybuilder are driving excitatory neurotransmission up, and these like physiological excitatory inputs like adrenaline, cortisol up for an extended period of time. Layer on top of that stimulant use, clenbuterol, yohimbine. Nowadays, even mitochondrial drivers, we don't think of them as stimulants, but they are, you could say, state enhancing is probably the best way that I could frame it with some of these peptides and small molecules. So there's sort of an energetic biochemical cost to that. And of course, all the other stimulants that we would use, the GLP, GIP, glucagon agonists, these do pretty robustly increase sympathetic tone, clearly. HRV declines, resting heart rate increases. Essentially, we have this multiple streams running into this big sympathetic lake. You could think of it as, and that lake kind of does this over the course of a competition prep. And you get to the end of your competition prep, and then when the dopaminergic input of reaching that single day is gone, how does anybody feel? Pretty terrible. A lot of this is unavoidable, right? So that's one side of things that we all know happens. There's a cost. So you will have to have a large focal point on paying the debt back that you've accumulated through there. But beyond that, what I've noticed in my career is over many years, there's a slow accumulation of stressors, of fatigue, whatever nomenclature we want to put on it, that occurs. And there's this very interesting term used in the neuroscientific literature on things like anxiety disorders and OCD, which is when the nervous system becomes sensitized. And I often compare the two worlds, not to say that bodybuilders have an anxiety disorder or something, but these are people that are subjected to high levels of sympathetic tone throughout the day that are generated by things external from their physical behaviors. But you see similar pathologies between the two. You also see very similar pathologies that exist in the functional health realm with the chronic disease element. There's a reason why the experiential outcome between all these groups share the same symptoms. We're looking at the physiological and psychological symptoms of a sensitized nervous system, the kind of symptoms of somebody that's dealing with a high level of stress over a long period of time. And it becomes very problematic the longer that you go on. And what's been very interesting to me is over the past year, we did a few podcasts on how the brain works, the relationship between the amygdala and the threat response and this kind of thing. We were trying to explain this sympathetic connection, how it exists within the brain, how it exists within your physiology. And me and Matt both received so many DMs, like more than I could ever have imagined from people. Oh man, this really spoke to me. I've been having panic attacks in the gym recently. I've been feeling this really high level of anxiety through the day recently. I've had this really disturbed sleep despite that. And there's a commonality between all of these individuals when you dig into this is there's been a very high level of accumulated stress over a period of time. And these people don't realize it, unfortunately, until something really gives, whether that's willful ignorance or you just didn't see it coming. I'm not sure, but this is something that really does exist in our world because it is moved forward at all costs with all these things, so that's been enlightening to watch.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that if you really do get ahead of it, it can make all the difference. Before we jump into what to look out for and how we begin to mitigate these issues, I want to slide back a little bit because you mentioned glutamate, and I think having an understanding of building up excessive glutamate and what happens as a result and what causes it is something that can give a lot of people a decent amount of foundational knowledge on this topic as a whole. But a lot of people don't understand it. So, like, what is glutamate? Like, what's it doing? How do we control it? We don't want to eradicate it, obviously, but just what is glutamate and what role does it play in all this? Because a lot of people are going to hear that and go, glutamine, what? Not glutamine, but what is glutamate?
Yeah, so to make this really simple, glutamate is the brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter. On the opposite side of the axis, you have GABA, which is our brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. And I really would like to say something about glutamate here because it's become really popular to quench glutamate. You will see supplements that either really robustly increase GABA or decrease cortisol, decrease glutamate, NMDA antagonists or GABA positive allosteric modulators or GABA agonists or co-agonists of NMDA, squashing glutamate has become very popular. For good reason, because it's become known as like the anxiety molecule, Glutamate is absolutely essential. It's essential for memory consolidation, for learning, for verbal fluency. If you didn't have any glutamate, you wouldn't learn anything. As if you read any of the literature on ketamine, which is a potent NMDA antagonist, so squashes endogenous glutamate, learning is grossly impaired. So we need glutamate. Another reason why we need glutamate, and this is confusing and paradoxical, so I'll try to explain this well because it's a complex topic. Glutamate is required for what's called extinction learning. So, and this is super relevant to what we're talking about because if you have stress or anxiety, these are difficult terms to use, right? Because they often explain similar states of neurotransmission. But if you have, I think a better term is arousal. If you have high neural or physical arousal, let me give an example. Let's say podcasting. Let's say I'm really nervous to do this podcast. Then preemptively, glutamate in the brain will increase robustly, as will adrenaline, as will cortisol. My brain enters a state of arousal. Now, what happens is if I ignore the brain signal that you shouldn't do this, which is what that basically is, the amygdala lights up, which is the threat, fear, survival response in the brain. And it will say, Joe, don't do that podcast. You're going to embarrass yourself, or you shouldn't do it. It's easy if you don't do it. So, this is what the brain tries to tell you. And I ignore that and I do it anyway. That is where neuroplasticity comes in, a remodeling of those neural pathways. And this is what we would call extinction-based learning. As a term often used in the neuroscientific literature called distress tolerance. So what level of distress can you deal with? So every time your brain becomes aroused, or you have physiological arousal, they coexist. And you go through with the thing anyway. You can think of non-reactivity is a good term to use, or surrender to the experience, and you do it anyway. That's where memory consolidation and extinction-based learning comes in. If glutamate is not present, it doesn't happen. There has to be, and until you get to about 8 to 9 out of 10 arousal, you have really robust learning. 10 out of 10, learning is terrible. So that there is that's your panic level. Learning doesn't really occur very well there. So what I'm trying to say here is there needs to be arousal, there needs to be stress, there needs to be anxiety for adaptation to occur. So for people that are using high doses of L-theanine, of ashwagandha, of anything, of glycine that's pushing up GABA, that's squashing glutamate, as a means to help combat stress, you very much could be keeping yourself from having the adaptation built in over time. Mm-hmm. So that's my kind of position on glutamate is probably not something that we want to try to modulate. Allow learning and adaptation to occur with graded exposure to stress. That doesn't mean be stressed all day. Just let yourself be crazy neurally aroused and charged and sympathetically driven. I think you should have blocks of your day where you specifically program exposure to arousal. And I think that you should do it with the knowledge that you are seeking an adaptation. So you should approach it with a surrender and non-reactivity based attitude. Because also what's clear in the data is if you white knuckle your way through experiences, adaptations are not good. You get the wrong adaptation.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. There's very few cases where we can actually supplement or drug our way through something and just continue to maintain the bad habits or the habits that might be causing the something we're trying to drug our way through. Now, how would somebody recognize that they're sympathetically dominant, assuming that they're just listening to this and this is the first they've ever heard of really anything nervous system related? Sometimes it might be a case where they've just been hyper-focusing on everything else. They might be generally aware, but they're starting to listen to this and going, well, I drink too much caffeine. Like I have 3 or 4 energy drinks a day, or I feel like I'm stressed out all the time, or my job is super insanely demanding, or my wife's an asshole, or my kids are assholes, my boss is an asshole. It's coming at me from all angles. Am I handling it well or am I not? And then what are some of the tools that they can use? Because you mentioned not necessarily trying to just blast yourself with supplements or PEDs or things that could be altering your state in the direction that you want. But I'll use myself as an example. I'm naturally very sympathetically dominant, and I've had to utilize different tools. I like tools and modalities more than I like supplements for that. And I do everything from meditation, breathing techniques. I found that journaling is incredibly helpful for at the tail end of the day. But I'll also use things like a Shakti mat. I use red light therapy, infrared therapy, green light therapy, cold plunge. I'm the type of person that dives in and explores a little bit of everything. So I can't tell people do what I do because it's worked well for me, because what I've done has included ludicrous amounts of technology that I've just wanted to experiment with. So although it's worked well for me and I feel it has, I can't say, oh, just do this, because it's unrealistic for a lot of people. How do we figure out that we might be in this situation? And then what's some of the low-hanging fruit to begin to correct it, in your opinion?
Awesome questions. I think I mentioned distress tolerance. I think that is a really great frame of reference to use to assess your autonomic health. So what I mean by distress tolerance is, what kind of autonomic reaction do you have to the stresses in your life as a magnitude of your previous experience? That sounds confusing. So, for example, you've got X amount of work that you need to do. And at one time in your life where your life was great and you weren't under high levels of stress, you would feel a certain way. Maybe you would get 3 out of 10 stressed. When we say stress, we're talking excitatory neurotransmission response. Everybody knows that maybe slight increase in heart rate, maybe that lower abdominal tension, this experience. Now, maybe as your distress tolerance comes down, maybe you're now at a 5 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10 for the same thing. Maybe you're noticing your autonomic arousal is higher. So that's a really good example. That's sometimes called distress tolerance, sometimes called psychological flexibility. So how can you kind of bend and move to the stresses of your life? What's your tolerability? Almost think of it like, if you're overreached in the gym and things start feeling heavy, and your movement patterns feel a bit rickety. Similar kind of thing, similar stresses that you would have moved through no problem, they start to become a little bit more difficult. Another one is what we would call the autonomic state shift. Now, it's called the autonomic state shift because it happens automatically. And here's a cool factoid. You can never consciously pinpoint when that happens. No human can do that. It's not within our conscious availability, which is fascinating. At no point do you go, oh, parasympathetic now. I was sympathetic 5 seconds ago, So your ability to mobilize. So, for example, you finish your workday and you're sat at the table with your wife having dinner or something in conversation. Have you fully mobilized from the activity that you finished? Or are you still sympathetically driven, even though state-wise you're now removed from the event? So are you mobilizing efficiently from sympathetic to parasympathetic? That's a great one to use. Now, there are, of course, biometrics, resting heart rate, fantastic tool, I think, but can become a bit washed in bodybuilder types. We have so many things that can acutely impact resting heart rate that exist external from these simple drivers, So I think chronic exposure wise, resting heart rate is a useful tool. I don't think on the day-to-day it's particularly useful. HRV is one of those markers that I wish was more accurate. And I wish we could have a broad stroke recommendation. I mean, if I get a 30 HRV, I'm fantastic. If my wife gets a 30, she's right off the rest of the week. If she's not north of 100, we got a problem. I'm averaging 17, but I'm a very relaxed individual.
Yep, same thing here. So 30 for me would be groundbreaking.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I think the more the distress tolerance and that kind of state shift, and I think bodybuilders are pretty good at their conception of internal experiences. And I think that lends itself well, actually, to some practices that I could come on to, because you mentioned specific practices that are good for, I suppose we could say, tuning the nervous system. So I will bang the drum on meditation all day, every day. I think everybody should meditate. I consider it the most important thing that I do with my day. I meditate for 1 hour each day. And I've meditated for many, many years, and I've got a deep love, passion, interest in Eastern philosophy. So I'm lucky to have that kind of background. But
can we zero in on that a little bit more specifically? Because I still think for all the information that we have out there, a lot of people still hear meditation and they just go, well, I'm not spiritual. Although meditation can be a very spiritual practice, meditation in and of itself, it's not about, hey, these things are going to fix themselves if we take some time and clear our mind and get closer to whatever our perception of God is. People will dismiss it as that. And it's literally regulating your nervous system and causing physiological changes, and people miss out on that. Like, what is meditation actually doing? Because too many people like take it out of consideration as being a tool, and they look at it as a spiritual practice when that's not the case necessarily. It can be, but what's going on when you meditate?
No, so if we look traditionally at Chan, Buddhist meditation, which is the kind of Chinese side of things, or even Zen Buddhism, which is more on the Japanese side, or even thousands of years back, all the way to Taoism, Confucianism. This is the practice of meditation is to see things as they are. This is not something spiritual for the next life. This is for you to cultivate the skill of awareness, quite literally, to know what is happening in this current moment right now, as it is, without preconceptions, without story that you tell yourself about the thing, without an ethical interpretation about the thing, what this actually is. So famously, Buddha himself became enlightened through the practice of Vipassana meditation. Vipassana sort of roughly translates to seeing things as they are, becoming one with what is. So enlightenment isn't something, like I say, for the next life or to be with the gods or something. This is just to have an untarnished view of the world as it is now. And if we can cultivate that present moment awareness, that's when the nervous system is in a true state of safety, assuming that you're not living in a war zone or you're under immediate physical threat. If you're sat at your desk answering emails, you're perfectly safe. And whenever you're perfectly safe, you should be parasympathetically driven. Our brain, unfortunately, hasn't quite evolved to understand these technological revolutions that we have. The amygdala specifically, as we mentioned earlier, which is the part of the brain that fires off threat, fear, stress, that is the oldest part of the brain. It's also the dumbest. It doesn't really understand what an email is and things like this. It registers any interpretation of threat as threat on your life, as violence. So any sympathetic tone, any stress of your own thoughts, that can be interpreted as a physical threat, of an email, of an Instagram comment. These are all things that your brain can think, run away, get away from this. This is real life danger. The practice of meditation is to come back here. What is happening now? That's why practices like samadhi meditation, which is a very simple form of meditation, that's just a single object to focus, like the breath. Why would we focus on the breath or a sound or a single sight? Why would we do that? Because that anchors you in the present moment. You've never inhaled in the past. You've never exhaled in the future. That happens now. And if you can cultivate the awareness of being here now, your nervous system will go, alongside that, if you can cultivate the experience of detaching from your own thoughts. One of the most beautiful things that meditation taught me was that I am the thing that sees the thoughts. I am the thing that experiences sensations and emotions, but I am not them. And in your meditation sessions, they will come, you will see them, and you will return to something else, and then they will go. So impermanence is a beautiful lesson that meditation will teach you. So when that thought comes along that can generate sympathetic tone, do you attach to it and it generate that excitatory neurotransmission? Or do you see it come and say, okay, don't need that, come back to this, and then it goes, and there's no physiological reaction? That is the kind of thing that meditation can teach you. Where is it that you want your awareness? And when other things go, a great description is like leaves on a river. You know, your consciousness is like the river, and these thoughts and experiences, they're like leaves. You can let them just whoosh past you, no problem. You can choose which one you want to pick up and have a look at. But until you've developed that skill, because it is a skill, you'll continue to live unconsciously and be victimized by your own thoughts and experiences.
Now, if this is really speaking to people, which I really hope that it is, but you have somebody that's high achiever, again, trying to perfect everything, doing a pretty good job at it, but in being a high achiever, they're very successful with their career and they have demands as far as time commitments go. They have a family. Their day is basically packed and they're micromanaging everything to just even fit in training and nutrition as it is. Do they have to start with like hours upon hours of clearing out time in the middle of the day, in the middle of everything to try to clear their mind? Or how would we go about implementing this? And what are some good ways to learn more about it? Are there apps that you recommend? Is it like a 5-minute day thing or is it a 5-hour a week thing? How do we begin to integrate this as though we're somebody going to the gym for the first time, starting a strength training program?
Yeah. I'm not going to lie and say that there isn't a dose-response relationship, because it's a practice, like learning an instrument, like resistance training to a degree, but there is an inverted U, that is for sure. I always say I don't have time not to meditate. What I've learned is my productivity is so fantastic. I can get things done with a single target of focus for a long period of time because I'm so practical. And this isn't about me kind of hyping myself up here. I understand that sounded a little bit arrogant, but we must know that we are cultivating the skill of focus. So when we meditate, we focus. Well, not on all styles of meditation. To be technical, Zazen meditation is specifically non-doing, but that's advanced. Nobody needs to worry about that unless they're deep in this shit. But yeah, your Vipassana style, your Samadhi style, this is focus. So you're training your mind to focus. Distractions come. You come back to the focus. Distraction come. You come back to the focus. So then when you do come to your work and you're doing your emails, you know yourself, you're doing your emails, another notification will pop up. Oh, let me have a quick look at that. Mm-hmm. Oh, what was that thing I was meant to look at on Instagram? And all this, that stuff starts to fizzle away as you start to cultivate this focus. Now, 10 minutes a day is better than none. I've noticed with my clients, 20 minutes a day is a very productive spot for meditation practice. Very productive if you do it properly. And I would highly recommend it be the first thing that you do with your day. Wake up and meditate. You don't need to worry too much about traditional posture. I mean, most bodybuilders are not going to be able to sit in full lotus position anyway. If you are looking for traditional posture, get a meditation bench with a cushion and sit in Caesar. So that would be kneeling. That's how I prefer to sit. Or just sit on the edge of your bed, whatever, and either do 20-minute Samadhi meditations. Just close your eyes and think about your abdomen moving. Your brain will wander. Perfect. Every time you return back to your focus, consider that one rep, just like you're in the gym. The mind is supposed to wander. If it doesn't wander, we're not really working anything. You're trying to train that return of focus, right? So Samadhi is just breath. Vipassana would be like a body scan. So you maybe put your awareness in your head. What sensations are there? And then your face, then your neck, then your chest. You're just doing a body scan of sensation, not trying to change anything, not trying to relax anything, just what's happening there. Okay, move on to the next place. This works well, I find, with bodybuilders. I actually went to a meditation retreat recently with a client who is a bodybuilder. And it was very Chan meditation based. So they start with this very slow body scan, microscopic parts of the body, center of the forehead, tip of the tongue, and it takes a long time. But because of the internal focus cultivated through years of resistance training, for both of us, it was quite easy to click as compared to the rest of the class. It was fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I don't recommend guided meditation personally. So this is a lot of people will download an app like Waking Up or Headspace or Insight Timer. And you can go on there and there's loads of, guided meditations. And I'm sure some people get on well with them. I think the problem is that you're still doing something. You're putting your headphones on and just listening to somebody talk. This doesn't feel like training the skill to me. It kind of feels like me watching a video of Ronnie Coleman lifting on YouTube versus me going to the gym. I think you should sit in silence. I use Insight Timer because I like the timer. I would just set the timer and do the practice.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many great Buddhist meditation teachers on YouTube. I think a great starting place is a guy called Mingyur Rinpoche, Mingyur Rinpoche. It will come up on YouTube. He seems to be the one that most newbies click really well with. But again, we're not talking anything spiritual here. We're talking about developing the skill of letting your nervous system cue safety, which is the most important thing. That is when you will be parasympathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you're not thinking about things that stress you out and you're not experiencing things that stress you out.
Hey guys, this is Drew from the past interrupting Drew from the future. It might actually be Drew from the future interrupting Drew from the past. I'm not 100% sure, but at the end of the day, yes, I'm putting a commercial in my own video, and I'm sure that YouTube has already hammered you guys with a bunch of random commercials for some pretty weird shit, but that's based on your algorithm. That's not my fault. This one is my fault though, but I just want to take a quick second and remind you guys about the DDT Method School Group. The DDT Method School Group is just $10 per month, but you can contribute to helping the podcast grow just by becoming a member. And when you're in, there's over 50 exclusive videos and articles, and I'm releasing more every week. That's 50 at the time of recording. If you're watching this later, there's probably well over 100, maybe even 200. There's a ton of content in there, regardless of when you jump in, and there's an amazing community of like-minded individuals as well. If you love the DDT Method podcast and you want to support us and continue to be able to watch us grow, this is the best way you can do it. The DDT Method School Group. Information down below somewhere. Again, I'm bad at this. Too many commercials. Back to the show. Now, outside of the meditative practices, are there additional benefits to focusing on different breathing techniques or breathwork drills that we can do independently of that? Or would you put all of that time and focus into additional meditation if possible?
I think they're really different things. I think meditation is, again, the skill of coming to terms of what is right now, that present moment awareness. And I wouldn't look at it as a stress reduction tool. I wouldn't look at it as a tool to push parasympathetic tone. I would look at it as, again, a tool to learn how to exist in the present moment. Mm-hmm. And that will sound really strange until you come to terms with what that is. Now, breath work, I think, is a tool to forcibly shunt that autonomic state shift. We've got pretty good literature on practices like 4-7-8 breathing and what that does to vagal tone, what that does to GABA, what that does to serotonin, what that does to glutamate. There's various breathwork practices that I think are great. I think for bodybuilder types, because as you know, there's a lot of breathwork practices that work through sympathetic and then move into parasympathetic. Wim Hof's probably the most popular version of that. Mm-hmm. I don't think that has utility for bodybuilder types. We have enough sympathetic expression. Right. There's an app called Breathball that I like to use with clients. And it's just a very easy tool to use for 4-7-8 breathing because it plays a little tone. And I'll often say, when you're driving to work, just put that on 10 minutes and breathe with it, nasal breathing. Mm-hmm. Or, when you get out the shower, just put that on for 10 minutes while you get dressed, and do, so maybe habit stacking, because again, people are busy. If you're doing it whilst you're walking the dog, whilst you're cooking, whilst you do your 10-minute post-meal walk, just put the tone on and do some 4-7-8 breathing. It gives your nervous system a little shunt towards parasympathetic tone. I'll put a caveat on this. If you are doing something that you want to drive a neural adaptation to, that you're nervous about, like let's say public speaking, and you're really nervous, that is not the time to do breath work. You'll have a negative interaction with that extinction-based learning. You want that arousal needs to be present after the fact. So like for me, for example, I train fasted and then I do cardio and then I go and sit in my garden, put my bare feet on the floor and do 10 minutes of 4-7-8 breathing. So I spent the whole morning very sympathetically elevated. I need to transition. I need to kind of arrive at the next step of the day, which is to sit at my desk and do client work. I need to be relaxed. I'll shunt that mobilization that way with some 4-7-8 breathing and a bit of grounding at the same time.
Tell me a little bit more about grounding, because it's something that I've noticed a lot of benefit from over time. And again, I can't use myself as the example. I have grounding sheets on my bed. I have a grounding pad under my desk. I go outside. I have a desk outside I can go work at and put my bare feet in the dirt. I'm all in on stuff. What's actually going on with grounding? Because we have some stuff in literature. We don't have that much of it. We have a lot of anecdotal experience from people from years and years and years. But what do we know is going on? What is likely going on? And how profound are the benefits?
Yeah, you said it, man. The science is shaky at best. The science is shaky. I've tried. It's one of those things that I've found such great benefit from, and my clients have found such great benefit from, that I've been like, I need to find some evidence-based support for this. And it's pretty fine. So I will say here for sure, if you're looking for peer-reviewed RCTs on grounding, it's not there yet.
No.
Some minor stuff. There is some evidence that it does acutely increase parasympathetic tone. But so does forest bathing. So is it just the act of being outside? I did a post a while ago where I posted, I did a carousel about spending time in nature. And I found an exhausted list of supporting data for some very interesting shifts that occur in neurotransmission with exposure to nature environments. A lot of this research done in Japan. GABA increases, cortisol decreases, glutamate decreases, exactly what we would expect from this parasympathetic driving experience for being in nature. Even people watching videos of nature, interestingly, or hearing nature sounds. I think that's partly the experience. Maybe, this is pretty wild, but maybe some kind of microbiome shift through the subdermis, maybe. I think that's I think that sounds out there, but maybe. What I do know is that my clients that do it, when they measure their HRV before and after, there's a pretty robust shift. So enough to make me want to go and sit in my garden in my bare feet and spend some time out there, even if I don't have high quality data to support it,
Well, it's just such a weird time right now because we do have so much stuff that's being, I don't want to say proven because is it ever really proven, but we're substantiating so many claims with so many studies, yet at the same token, there are countless studies that have yet to be done or will never be done. And we have to look at anecdotal experience and the experience of others, and we have to make intelligent guesses, and we have to make claims. Like I'm experimenting with green light therapy right now, which is all based on ocular absorption of green light, which theoretically is coming from that same idea of nature exposure and how sunlight will permeate through plant life, and then that green gets somehow absorbed by the eye, which shifts to parasympathetic tone, et cetera, et cetera. And I do feel like there's something to that. There are zero studies on it or close to zero studies on it. There's some work on various spectrums of light that touch on it, but nothing substantiated. But I know something's happening, and I know based on how I know other processes that go on physiologically, what is likely happening if something's happening or what can be happening. And it's tough because you can make claims or you can make recommendations based on your experiences, what you do know about how the human body works, et cetera, et cetera. And there can be no studies to prove it. And it can be the best case scenario for the person or the best choice of practice or modality or whatnot. But it's so tough to just say, hey, based on these intelligent decisions that we're making in these hypotheses, this is the best way to go, because unfortunately somebody else will do the same thing based on a theory that a gram of tren per week is perfectly fine or something completely absurd like that. So it's tough to be able to say, or it's tough to try to say, we can extrapolate enough data to say this is probably the case. We don't need a study for it right now, because that will open Pandora's box to doing that with either poor intentions or complete ignorance or going the complete opposite direction. But there's a lot to this, to grounding, to these different practices and whatnot. What are some other things that might be along this line? And it can be deeper into grounding. Maybe it's light exposure. What are some things that you feel that despite lack of testing at the current time, you're just seeing have profound effects or generally good effects even across a multitude of people? What are some of these other fringe woo-woo type practices that it's kind of like, wait a minute, there's more to this?
Yeah, I've got a good one. I mean, there's many practices that I could put under the umbrella of nervous system regulation, some more supported than others. I think one that's been getting some real flack recently is blue light blocking. I've seen the attack on Andrew Huberman for still recommending blue light blocking in the light of new evidence or something. I would kind of disagree. I think the evidence for avoiding blue light is still compelling enough for me to want to engage in that, even for people that take exogenous melatonin. I think when it comes to the function of the retina itself, there's more interesting things happening there than just the pineal secretion of melatonin. So that's one that I still enjoy. I still wear my blue light blockers at 6 p.m. every single day. And my sleep scores on my wearable do change, because 3 nights a week after training jiu-jitsu late, I'm not home till 8 p.m. I don't wear my blue light blockers and the sleep's worse. Is it the jiu-jitsu? Maybe. So here's a very strange one that I love to do, that I've practiced for a very long time, mostly because I've got a martial arts background, is Qigong. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
No.
So you can think of it somewhat as a moving meditation, but it is still used in China today as a, I don't know, it's like a medication, but they'll often co-prescribe Qigong alongside traditional they perform Qigong in hospitals still in China. And these are ancient movements and forms that you will coordinate with the breath, and you can forcibly feel a significant drive of parasympathetic tone when you do a Qigong session. And is there any data to support Qigong? Does Qi exist? I think, we can go into all of this. I'm as evidence-based as the next guy. What I do know is when me and my clients do these things, whether it's just driven by the lymphatic drainage that these forms tend to drive, whether it's driven by simple present moment awareness and what that does to the autonomic nervous system, because that really is what it cues, just like a meditation, whether it's the breath work element, I don't know if I care at this point. I do know that people really seem to enjoy it, and it has a robust impact, especially for anybody listening to this that says, I can't sit still and meditate. Point one is that's exactly why you should meditate, because that is the brain showing a resistance to a still state, which is what you want to train it out of. But if you want to graduate to that, just go on YouTube and search Qigong, which is spelled QI space GONG. You'll feel pretty silly doing it, so maybe do it in your room on your own. But it is very nourishing for the nervous system and something that I've done for a long time. And a lot of my clients do, and they really love it.
And for anybody that's worried about looking funny when you do anything like this, you got to kind of take a step back and big picture, look at all the weird shit that we do. It all looks funny to somebody that's from the outside looking in. So at this point in time, my gym's in my garage. I do so much weird shit in the front lawn. I just assume that my entire neighborhood thinks I'm nuts anyways. But that's definitely one that I want to look into for sure. I do think it started coming back to me a little bit as you were talking about it. I think I've seen some of it before, but in all fairness, I've probably seen it in your content. So it's something that I definitely should do a deep dive in, because I know I did recognize that it is something that you've spoken about. And I think it's something that can be incredibly beneficial, just based on, again, it's a practice that it's low hanging fruit and can be applied with a little bit of time put aside to it. And of course, dose dependency, the more that you do it, the more you'll get from it. But I think touching on things like that, like grounding, like breath work, and of course, meditation is kind of maybe the biggest potential impact maker out of all of this.
I think, sorry, excuse me to cut across you there, but one thing that I forgot to mention there that's been so powerful and you've probably heard me on social media talking about this, but this is a very uncomfortable experience that ends up becoming one of the most beautiful things that you can do, is to do one thing at a time, which sounds like real simple. But I mean it like, so let's say you get up and walk your dog, no podcast, try to be as empty as possible, even eventually no thought. There's a concept used in Taoism often called fasting the mind. You know how we would have this, there's certain regions of the health world that would think that fasting is very healthy for you, right? Whether that's true or not is besides the point. There was a belief in Taoism that fasting the mind was a very healthy thing for you. So a time where you can be without thought. And people may not realize this, but this is one of the reasons why you love training. Because when you're in there, you think, I wasn't thinking about anything, Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why I love to train jiu-jitsu is, when you're rolling, nothing else exists, only that. And it's beautiful. Well, you can train that so that that's everything that you do. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so you're eating your first meal, all you're doing is eating. That's it. No YouTube, no TV, no podcast. Or you're cooking, all you're doing is cooking, and put your awareness on it. Mm-hmm. Attention on what you're actually doing, and the brain won't like it. I promise you, it'll be uncomfortable at first. But when you can get that present moment awareness to one thing, it is truly revolutionary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's so tough too, because again, most of the people that are going to be absorbing this content, watching a podcast like this, are high achievers. So I think a lot of it comes down to time management, which we all struggle with, I'm sure. It's almost the more successful you are to a certain degree for a certain amount of time, you're going to struggle with that until you master it, at which point then you can make sure that you have time for all of this. But practices like this are significantly different than something that you have to assemble a machine for or go to a place to attend. It's just about making the time for them consistently. And in some cases, it's like you said, just separating things and focusing on that one thing at a time. Now, if somebody is laying the foundation appropriately with all of these practices and the situation mandates a more aggressive approach or a more aggressive protocol, I guess first and foremost, is there ever a situation, be it maybe a contest prep situation or training with a similar physical demand if you're not doing a contest, is there ever a time to implement more drastic interventions for manipulation of the nervous system in order to drive recovery? I know that there are certain peptides like vasointestinal peptide or VIP or hexarelin that in their own way is very different, affect parasympathetic tone. I know that we have things like actual like e-stim devices for the vagus nerve that I own one that I use only when I'm particularly stressed. That has been beneficial, not groundbreaking, but beneficial. And these interventions are definitely a much stronger signal than something like some breath work or some meditation or whatnot. Now, that doesn't make them better. It just means more aggressive, more impactful, things that you just implement as in taking a drug or hooking up a machine or anything like that. Is there a situation that mandates stepping it to that level? assuming that the other things are all in place. We don't want to skip over the most important foundational stuff. But what are some tools, if any, in the supplement or peptide or just PED world or the world of technology that you feel are applicable, and in what situations are those applicable?
What I will say is if you practice these things for long enough, people won't believe me when I say this, but you practice these things for long enough, your distress tolerance will be so high that your need for external resources will be barren. You know, quite simply because your ability to select what things you want to experience will be so strong. Now, what also changes is your interpretation of stress. Here's a good example of this. You'll know yourself. People go through multiple contest preps, and hunger experientially dampens as they go through, because there's quite a robust neural adaptation to eventually is like, I'm not really bothered about this anymore. So you cue this non-reactivity. So how is it that stress, the interpretation of stress, is lower now than it was previously, but we're in exactly the same place? So that's the kind of thing that you can expect if you can tune the way that you interpret the stresses of your life with an attitude of acceptance. So you're not layering stress on top of stress. You know, I'm hungry. I hate this hunger. I wish I could eat this. Why can't I? Oh, you should have just left it as I'm hungry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because just that signal, or I can observe that I'm experiencing hunger, and then you guide your attention elsewhere. The distress is so small. Now, moving on to, so I was trying to sell my meditation. Yes, absolutely. I think ad hoc use of peptides and supplements are necessary in some circumstances. I'm a huge fan of Solank. I think that is a very interesting molecule. And I did for anybody interested, if you go on my story highlights and go on, it's either on supplements or peptides, I did a big write-up as to why. Solank is very much in a category of its own of stress-reducing supplements because it doesn't decrease this arousal-based neurotransmission. So, but it does quite potently shift up GABA action and GABA affinity. So you can reasonably expect for your distress tolerance to go up with no sedation and no decrease in arousal. So you can still make those adaptations, those new neural pathways, whilst actively experiencing less anxiety and less stress in the process. Mm-hmm. Certainly in a class of its own. Now, outside of that, yes, if you are at the point where you're doing all of these things, but you're not sleeping at all and you are so dysregulated, I think acute use of, I quite like rhodiola ad hoc. I think that's a pretty good modulator of cortisol. KSM 66 less frequently. I think that, you know, I've previously spoken out about KSM 66 not being something to fear because I don't believe that it causes anhedonia or some of the other things that Reddit claims that it does. Mm-hmm. There's no data to support that, unless you're somebody with like normal cortisol who then just ends up in hypocortisol land, then yeah, you'll certainly feel pretty flat. You shouldn't have used it in the first place. But using something like KSM 66 on your most stressful days, or particularly a night that you know you're not going to sleep, I think works pretty well. Some of the active constituencies in the withanolides of KSM 66 can last up to 20 hours, and that's where I get a bit funny with. I really don't like the idea of things being present in the brain that play with adaptation-based pathways. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm too careful with that, but I really want to think, is this person going to prep in the future? And are they going to have those neural pathways and still to be able to tolerate the stress a bit better then?
Right.
You know? But if they are falling apart, then yeah, we may need to implement these things, assuming that, but you know what, that'd be a pretty rarity. I can't think of a single client that's ended up in that position as of recently. As long as you're prepping for the duration of time that you need to, refeeding as often as you need to, not doing anything silly with really aggressive drug loads, really aggressive stimulant loads, then your need for supplements, or even, back in the day, you'll know this, it was just extremely common for benzodiazepines and opiates to be used throughout a contest prep. I remember in my early days, that was just fairly standard in the UK scene, And if you want to destroy your opportunity to create some neural adaptations, take a benzo.
I feel that there's even some things that we're starting to see now with the availability of Kratom, particularly in the United States, as a faux opiate tool. And I don't hate Kratom. I think Kratom is a powerful tool if utilized correctly. I just think the ability to abuse it is a slippery slope with it becoming more accessible.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of content on Kratom. That's the English way of saying it is Kratom.
Probably the correct
apologies for my... Actually, I think in Thailand they call it Kratom, which I think is the correct way. And we've also done some stuff on Kava as well. So these are both interesting, hate to say drugs, compounds. Very interesting. Kratom has so many different alkaloids, the primary one being mitragynine, or however you say that. Pretty potent affinity for the mu-opioid receptor. Far more than codeine, far more than the active metabolite tramadol. So not something to scoff at. I think it can be used as a tool like anything else. I also know for a fact, and I've seen this in so many clients and friends, that it is very disrupting to the nervous system.
Yes.
It's extremely disruptive to sleep if you're taking it anywhere close to sleep. It is not a classical opiate in the sense that it does also drive dopamine and stimulatory neurotransmission quite potently, especially in the kind of lower doses. And if you are going to use it, maybe 2 to 3 times a week maximum, at like 4 grams a go maximum, I would say. The problem with it is it feels very good and you get a lot of work done.
Exactly.
And that's when you know that it's not good. So Kava, on the other hand, interesting. Like, I don't know if you've got much experience with Kava, but a calcium channel blocker.
Very much. Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's a really interesting compound. So it's got these secondary GABA effects. So it's not a GABA agonist. So there's not going to be any kind of glutamate rebound or anything like this. It seems to get there through calcium channel blocking. And with that, you get a little bit of dopamine increase as well. So fantastic. But what I've seen is that the active life of some of the metabolites, I believe the primary ones, carvane, are pretty long. So again, if you're in a situation where you're trying to drive adaptations, I know I keep banging on about this, but there will be that inhibitory crossover. But again, look, once or twice a week, you've had a real stressful day, you need something to help wind down for sleep, I would pick Kava over anything else.
Like, I've actively used Kava 2 to 3 days per week for probably 2 years now. Kratom, different story, because that, like you said, is very easy to abuse because the amount of stuff that you get done. So Kratom is very much something that I buy it the day I want to use it, and I don't have it on hand otherwise, because then it's too easy to use the next day, not necessarily due to a chemical dependency, but because, oh crap, that made work way more fun yesterday. I want to do that again. So habitual dependency with that one, I feel, is the slippery slope that greater accessibility will lead to people generally abusing it for longer periods of time. So Kava, I'm a little bit more lenient with, but I try not to do anything that has a effect on my neurochemistry acutely more than 2 to 3 days a week as it is, because otherwise I find that I'll put myself in a position where I'm utilizing drugs just to be a functional human when I don't want to have to be on really anything outside of my testosterone replacement. Is there anything else that you feel that is kind of in that weird category of, people have heard of Kava and Kratom, but it can be pretty profound acutely, but it's also a little bit much for regular use. Anything else fall into that world? Because I know technically ashwagandha can be considered something like that, although I do think short bouts of regular use can be merited in some cases there. But what about just some of these modulators that are lesser known, or people know about them, but they don't know how they're working? Anything else in that category?
Phenibut, probably.
Oh, I don't think we've ever discussed Phenibut on this podcast, but please.
Yeah, probably for the best.
What I know, but what are your thoughts? Is there a use case? It can be problematic if abused, but can you give us kind of a quick overview? What is it and when would it be beneficial?
Yeah, so if anybody has Phenibut and they are using it, be extremely careful. The withdrawals are hellish. Up there with benzos, up there with pregabalin. Now, it's not a benzo. It's not a direct GABA agonist. If I remember correctly, again, it's a real potent calcium channel blocker. So you're getting a big increase in GABA and an increase in dopamine. So you've got this kind of neurotransmission that everybody wants all the time. You are very confident, no anxiety, feel great, but also very motivated. What a dangerous combination. In high doses, like over 2 grams, it's very euphoric indeed. And that's where the danger kind of stands. But over time, as you use it, you'll notice glutamate rebounds become much more predominant. Normally 48 hours-ish post-dosing. If you're using in the recreational standard of like more than 2 grams, and even using weekly, eventually you'll notice a tolerance because the active life is so long. You can take a couple of grams of Phenibut on a Saturday morning, wake up Sunday morning feeling amazing still. It's still rocking to some degree. And then Monday, eventually, that glutamate rebound is nasty. And that glutamate rebound will get worse and worse and worse. And the anxiety is never worth that one day of euphoria or something like that. Now, I have used Phenibut to do by seminars, for example, like a gram to do a seminar a couple of times, which has gone really well. I've also gone through periods of using it like once a week, every Saturday, and eventually had to knock that on the head. Where it becomes problematic, though, really is 3 times a week, 4 times a week, because it is so easy to keep using. But tolerance sets in pretty damn quickly, and the withdrawals are horrible. Make Kratom withdrawals look like a walk in the park. Devastating withdrawals. So quite honestly, I think I would just recommend anybody stay away from that.
It is an incredibly advanced tool if you are going to consider it a tool. And that one, for anybody that's listening to this saying like, oh, wait a minute, I think I want to give that a try. To put it in retrospect, I discussed my experiences with Kava, with Kratom, with these things that are potent tools, but if abused can be problematic and whatnot. And like I mentioned before, I will 1000% buy Kratom when I need or want. I don't need it, but when I want Kratom, and I won't stock up on it. If there's a sale, I'm not buying a case of drinks. I'm not buying a whole bottle of capsules. I'm buying single serve, and I'm using it for the day that I mandated a useful tool for that day, because I know myself. And if I have a case of Kratom seltzers, I will drink the whole thing within like 10 days. And I might have made that mistake before. I've had the same bottle of Phenibut for like 4 years, because when you deep dive into it and read people's experiences with withdrawals, it is legitimately horrifying. So even my addictive personality won't open that fucking bottle unless it's like a specifically like, this is a day to do this as a benefit. And then there's a significant amount of time in between. So I'm not trying to educate further on it, but I'm just trying to paint the picture for anybody that might just go, oh, they said it could be dangerous. That must mean it's good. If you deep dive into people's experiences with withdrawal from Phenibut, it's horrifying. Awesome topic. I'm glad that did come up, because people do every now and then, they'll leverage questions on it. And it's one of those things where you do have to be careful with how you're giving the information, because people tend to think dangerous means it's better, which is not always the case. Before we wrap things up, Joe, I just want to kind of circle back to the importance of having a well-regulated and balanced nervous system and how profound that can be, not just for general health, because obviously it is, but for those immediate goals. Can you tell me what type of difference we're looking at in acute nutrient partitioning if you're trying to eat your meal while you're ramped up and sympathetic and stressed out versus being calm?
Oh my goodness. Firstly, can I mention one caveat?
Yes.
We live in a world now where you go on Instagram and search nervous system regulation or something. You will get lots of things like regulate your nervous system with this, regulate your nervous system with that. I would discourage from anybody falling in that trap, because I said earlier in the podcast, it's a paradox. If your brain watches you continually trying to regulate your nervous system, you will do the opposite. The brain starts to recognize this just normal state of arousal as a threat because you're constantly trying to move out of it. It's not what we use these tools for. Many people have developed long withstanding anxiety disorders that they've stayed in it's called the fixing loop. You know, if you continually try to fix something that isn't a problem, the brain watches you doing that, you cause yourself more problems. So if you are a little bit stressed, don't obsess about regulating it and things like that. Just have some healthy things that you do in your day that help your nervous system, and then get on with your day. Anyway, so I don't have any literature again to support the increase in nutrient partitioning through being parasympathetic necessarily, but what I will say is I've had countless people inquire for consultations with me over the years that will say, I've got SIBO, I've got this GI issue, I've had this gut map and this, these chronic digestive issues. And before we do anything else, I've just implemented some basic routines around their eating hygiene, you could say. For example, a little practice could be you sit before you eat. You just reflect with gratitude that you've got that food to eat. Gratitude is a very potent stimulator of parasympathetic tone. So you think, I'm really grateful for having this tasty meal in front of me. Then maybe you do a couple of 4, 7, 8 breaths, just 2. Try to arrive at what you're doing away from work. Never eat at a work environment or anything like that. Eat in silence, somewhere very comfortable, no TV, whatever. And I say just the first 3 bites. This is something I actually learned at the Shaolin Temple in Europe. The first 3 bites, eat really slowly and try to taste every single little bit of that mouthful. So putting all your awareness into that mouthful. So that present moment awareness. So something as simple as that. And genuinely, and I've got the screenshots if people want to look at this on my story highlights. It's like, I thought I had SIBO, I was just stressed. Like my digestion's the best it's been in years. I can eat whatever I want now. I thought I had this intolerance. And really, these people were just kind of chronically charged and eating whilst emailing, and then on the go in the car eating or whatever, trying to answer emails or WhatsApps on the phone and eating. There's a reason why parasympathetic tone is often called feed and breed or rest and digest. It has to be present for nutrient partitioning to occur, So paramount importance.
Mm-hmm. It just makes such a big impact that will add up and will be noticeable, and it will reflect in people's physique, their health, their performance, and absolutely everything. And I'm so glad that this is the direction that the conversation went, because it's one of those topics that people don't want to get into in our space in terms of educating both long form and short form, because it's hard to catch somebody's attention with like, let me tell you about how you need to essentially calm the fuck down physiologically, because people are so caught up in sensationalized information about like, what drug can I take for this? What can I do for that? What's the cool thing I can do, or the newest movement I can do for my lats, or this, that, or the other thing. And something like this, these practices, mastering your day-to-day routine to put yourself in the best situation to have that balance within your nervous system, that will move the needle on your physique development significantly faster than, I'll just go ahead and say, literally any new exercise that somebody comes up with, regardless of how optimal it might be or be not or whatever the hell. So this stuff is profoundly important and moves the needle, but it's very hard to articulate it in such a way that it will actually communicate that to people. And that's one thing that I feel like you do so well with your content. And hopefully it's received as such in this podcast as well, because again, it's such low-hanging fruit that's so impactful. Joe, if people want to dive more into this or any of your other work or education or look into your company for coaching, where can we find you?
Okay, so the widest net is obviously the app. So on the App Store or on the Google Play Store, just search Physique Collective. So for some context on Physique Collective, we've got 300 hours of educational content on there now and a big community forum, and it's only $9.99 a month. The reason is that still to this day, it's a passion project, never taken a penny out of the company. The only thing that money goes to is to our videographer. So we literally just use the money to make more content or bring more educators on there. So that's why I love the community so much. Everybody's just there to learn. We've got a thriving community there. Tons of videos on all of exactly this kind of stuff, alongside the stuff that you discuss on your other podcasts, peptides, PEDs, periodization, training, nutrition. It's all there. So I'd love to see you guys there. If you want to contact me directly for consultation or for coaching, my Instagram is @Joe_Physique Collective. I've also got loads of stuff on there on the story highlights with regard to mindfulness, meditation, peptides, PEDs, whatever. And I'm always happy to help. It just like any follow-up questions from this podcast, just DM me. I always respond to DMs. I'm happy to help, even if it's not for follow-up work or anything like that. If it's to get you guys into these kind of practices in the right direction, I would love to just have the opportunity to do that.
Awesome. Joe, thank you so much for your time. And everybody, please go check out all of that information. I'll be signing up for the app today, 1000%. No smoke. You can double check that. I'm not bullshitting you. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the DDT Method Podcast. We will see you next week.